Hey guys, how's it going and welcome back. Today's video we're going to cover dynamic microphones. So a dynamic mic doesn't use any kind of batteries or external power source to allow the microphone to work. You just simply need to plug in an XLR cable at this end and either a XLR on the other end, direct into your mixing desk or mixing board, if you want to call it that. Either way, either term is correct, okay? Or the other plug on the other end would be a tip sleeve plug. Now, of course, that would look something like one of these. You have XLR on here, plugs right into the back of the microphone, only goes in one direction. There's 3 prongs, only fits one way. The other end would contain our other plug end, which is tip sleeve. Now, the problem with these kind of cables is they're going to be a lot less output than an XLR cable, which uses a 3-wire system, and the signal is going to be a lot more dirtier, okay, with this kind of a cable. With XLR to XLR, not only do you get a little bit more output, but you get a clean, balanced signal as well. So, very important if you care about how your audio sounds on your recordings, okay? But for general purpose use, for karaoke stuff, that's the common plug system, would be a tip sleeve on this end, because karaoke machines don't use XLR to XLR connections, okay? But they can use a microphone that's XLR to tip sleeve. So XLR to XLR is definitely the ideal in that sense for your best quality sound reproduction, as well as a slight bit better output going to the input source of your board, okay? Now, one of the biggest things with a passive or dynamic microphone that you need to be aware of is distance, okay? You don't have to eat the mic. Like we've seen rock stars over the years, they're like right up on it, and there's no need for that. That's actually way too close, you know, but I mean, they're trying to avoid some implosions, which that can help in that sense. But they're also throwing a whole pile of saliva all over the insides of this and causing things to rust and go gross and rot the, you know, little screen out of there and so on, right? You know, so either way it can go against them in the end. But the average distance that you should be away from one of these microphones is between 2 to 4 inches. Anything further than that is going to drastically reduce the capability of your engineer from being able to get you proper output through the house system, because they're going to run out of headroom too soon, or amount of control that they have over your fader level, okay? So when you're out here, they're jacking the faders right up, and of course the house speakers would go up even higher because you choose to be this far away, which is wrong, okay? Nobody can hear you. The other problem is it messes with your EQing big time. You would have to pretty much annihilate the EQ to just attempt to try and eliminate feedback issues from overdriving the system, okay? Now, you do need to obviously be a certain distance away from any kind of speakers that are on stage, right? So that's reasonable, right? So main speakers are usually out in front of musicians, one at either side or however many you got. But they're usually out wide and further away from you, but it still isn't going to solve your feedback issues if you're way back here and they're jacking the snot out of the system. And it's definitely going to still cause you a problem with lack of audio output as well. We've run into this more than one occasion where having somebody just speaking, okay, with one of these mics, they're down here with it, okay? That's too far away. Or they're way out here, too far away. So you have to do your best to explain to the person behind the microphone, look, this is a dynamic or passive microphone, and we have to have a certain amount of control over this, and we can't have that if the microphone can't hear you, okay? And then people can't hear you. So that can be a constant fight with some people, And yeah, it happens a lot, especially with singers, okay? And I see this a lot of time even in churches over the years too that I've attended. People are holding microphones and they're holding here and then they drop it down and back up, and this is bad too, you know, or they'll come back up here where they belong and then they become too obnoxious because we've already adjusted the level for going down here to try and get them into things properly. It's a constant battle with people, and musicians generally tend to be the worst ones to deal with because they think they know it all. Okay, now it's kind of a weird thing coming from me because not only am I a musician, I also have my own home studio. So am I my worst enemy? No, because I know how to run this equipment properly. Therefore, I'm one of the exceptions to the rule that I actually understand these microphones, how they work, what I can and cannot get away with in my own studio, let alone in live performance. I know what I can do with one of these as well. But the majority of musicians out there, no, they have no freaking clue, and you got to educate them, and that can be difficult because they tend to get a little pissy when you try and tell them what to do. But the thing is, you're the engineer, you have final say and control over everything. So give them a choice. Listen to you, or you're simply going to just shut their channel off. It kind of is nasty to do, but the thing is, they'll grow up eventually, so especially once they get shut off once in a while, because they'll probably still try and do their own thing, and that's not going to happen because you need to get them in the mix. So you have to constantly, for a little while, re-educate. Want to be in the mix? Want to be heard? Then you need to use this properly. So 2 to 4 inches is ideal, not just for proper sound pickup, but also for setting the gain level control properly on the board so that it doesn't peak out, okay? It doesn't redline the main meters, doesn't redline the peaker, so you know you get a clean signal versus the distorted signal. I want the clean signal. So just a cable alone is not going to guarantee you a clean signal and good output out of the microphone. You also have to have the microphone a certain distance away. When I set up microphones myself, especially dynamic mics, but any microphone, I try and sing the absolute loudest, or I'll shout the loudest I can for a minute or two while I'm setting the gain level, so that number one, I know where my meters go. They stay between 0 and 6 on my board, could be 0 and 3 on yours, whatever, it's still in the good. You do not want to approach red on the output meters. That's your house output meters. And you also want to look at that peak or PFL channel side. Now some boards it's kind of like a permanent PFL, it's just a little peak light like on my little Yamaha. There's no shutting that off, which is fine in this case because it's not a requirement to be turned off while in use, right, on this board. Other boards, yeah, you're going to want to turn that off because otherwise you can't even balance your mix after. But anyways, so I got to make sure that the peak is not going to flash, and I won't actually even permit even a momentary little spike flash, so I clean it up that clean. And so that means I have to really be more cautious with my microphones, whether they're powered mics, condenser mics, which are powered mics either via phantom power or a battery. Okay, it could be a wireless mic, right? It's battery powered. It's going to have a lot more transmit output power than something like this. So it becomes the same idea as a powered mic because it is a powered mic in that case, right? Condenser mics are powered microphones. They'll either run off phantom power or contain their own built-in battery. These don't have either one, and you can turn phantom power on even if you have 10 of these on your board and just one condenser mic. You can still have phantom power on. The power will not get through this XLR connection because it's not allowed to go through the circuit in a power situation. That's not how this microphone wiring is set up. So you don't have to worry, you're not going to harm your microphones by having phantom power on if you've either accidentally turned it on or if it has to be on for certain microphones. Now phantom power is not required for headsets, wireless headsets. It's not required for wireless microphones either. It's only required on condenser mics because they have to have either phantom power or their own self-contained power. Okay, so either way. But anyways, the other thing with these passive mics is the gain setting. When you're yelling into it to set it, you have to keep turning that gain knob as you're doing that, and you got to be between 2 and 4 inches. Now, you can take a rule where all passive mics could be set the same, but sometimes you're going to come across the odd singer that you will have to pull their gain way back. Okay, because they're going to be pinning the daylights out of the board because they're too vocal. But as a general rule, yes, you can actually set all the passive mics on your board if you're dealing with the average singers, okay? So the average amount or majority of singers out there that are not going, hurrah, you know, all the time, right? So they're actually singing at a reasonable level, you know? So it's like a song, Come Now's the Time to Worship. One of the first part of the lyrics is Come Now's the Time to Worship. So if you're singing that song, it's not sung very loudly into the mic, right? You can be loud in the system, but you're not shouting, okay? So, you know, that's a difference, right? If you shout, you have more output in from here into your board, affects the gain setting, affects the meters. But the mic was set so that you could get away with shouting on, say the next song needed shouting, right? So you're going to sing the song Who Made Who or Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, right? I mean, these guys are shouting into their mics. So they're still on the average side of, you know, where the gain is generally set. Now gain is output from here is input into the board, right? So that gain setting has nothing to do with feedback ever being caused. You will never cause feedback from too much gain. What you do is you cause the entire system to distort like crazy, okay? And that's kind of really bad, right? So it's like, do you want to sound good or sound like garbage? Take your pick. But the gain has to be controlled properly, obviously. We need proper signal, we need it clean, you know, so that it's understandable to the system and through everything else and to the people. But that means consistency in learning how to be 2 to 4 inches here. Now the gain settings that I tend to use on my particular setup in here, which I use everywhere when I'm working on boards for passive mics or dynamic mics, I tend to run the gain at basically, I guess if you want to call it 1 to 10 on the dial, it would be 8, okay? Which could be like 4 o'clock or position or something like that. You know, kind of, it depends on how you want to run your numbers. You know, a guitar in itself has a dial, 1 to 10. It doesn't have clock positions. We don't use clock positions, all right? Because a lot of our guitars just have, you know, chrome knobs. There's no numbers, right? We just kind of go by feel and by sound and what we're listening to. But with these things, you have just a scale that goes around, okay? And it's in decibels, right? So, but you want to have it at where the 8th position would be on the dial. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1 being the lowest. And then you go up to 10, right? So, but that would be 4 o'clock position is generally 8. And that's a good position to be at for pretty much all dynamic or passive microphones because it seems to work the best. But like I said, you may get the odd singer that is way louder in projection, okay, and close up, which is where they should be, but they're way too loud of a singer. You're going to have to haul their gain back to probably somewhere anywhere between 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock position, okay, or if you want to count the scale, you know, dead center is technically, that would be your 12 o'clock position, would be like 5, right? And then 6, and then 7, etc., right? So you may have to dial their gain back specifically for that singer at that time, but everybody else that's not blasting or over blasting projection of their vocals, you could leave them in the normal common position that's found. Now EQing somebody's voice is a totally different story. Now that's something I want to touch on a little bit before we go here. EQing is very important to know about. It's not all this direction for males and all this direction for females. We all have different vocals, different ranges of our vocal range. We all sound different. There's no two males that sound the same exact tone, right? So that's why we have different voices. That's why one guy can sound normal, another guy, well, what we call normal, another guy could have a very squeaky voice, right? Or a very feministic voice. And there are women out there that have very manly voices, which kind of makes me a little concerned, but hey, that's what they were born with. That's what they got to deal with. We are all in the same boat, right? So no judging there, right? But that's how you have to deal with EQing, right? And believe it or not, sometimes less is more. And EQing is what's going to trap you into the feedback loop as well. Okay, so whether your speakers are more out front or whether they're closer to your musicians on stage, right? Because you're not going to use stage monitors, you're not using in-ear monitors, you're going to need your speakers on stage. They need to hear themselves too. Stage monitors are lousy. I would tell everybody, get away from stage monitors unless it's a PA powered amp type stage monitor, because then at least you're going to get a truer representation of the sound that you would out of the main speakers. But if you're using the common PA amps, which are made for, yeah, you can put vocals through them. Yeah, you can plug an acoustic guitar in. Doesn't sound the best, but it works. But your vocal range is very hard to EQ that, and that's one of the other things that musicians crap about is, you know, my voice is sounding too tinny, can you correct that? Well, the problem is they can't really correct it. The speaker system in those amps, okay, are not really designed to work with vocals, right? They get you your guitar or your instrument in there, but they're really not meant for vocals, so they can't really be EQ'd from the board very well, and they generally don't have an EQ or much of an EQ system on the amplifier itself, and even at that, it's still going to go against you because they don't work that well, because they're not designed to EQ vocals, which is why you should really get rid of stage monitors, because they're completely pointless. Put a main set of speakers in behind the musicians so that they can actually hear themselves for what they are, because they need to hear themselves and you need to hear them too. So in a situation like a church, it works out perfect if you have the stage space to do that. Okay. Otherwise, if you don't, keep your speakers out front, and everybody else, all your musicians, should be on in-ear monitor systems instead, because they need to be able to hear properly, right? And you need to be able to EQ them. And your job doing the EQing is at the board end. You need to plug into the monitor jack with a set of in-ears or really good high-end headphones, or if you have a soundproof sound booth, then you get a really good set of reference monitors that would help you get things going much better, right? Because you need to listen to a quality of sound, get everybody at the proper pecking levels, the proper EQ levels, etc. And then this way you can avoid the feedback problems too, right? So there's a lot more to it than just plug a mic into a board and turn up a gain and do stuff. There's a lot more involved, right? And it doesn't take much to learn if you're willing to, and it's only as hard as you make it to be. So. But that's our little bit on passive mics, other than, of course, you do have different mic patterns that have different purposes. And you'll want to Google microphone patterns specific to dynamic mics and see what's out there in patterns and how these patterns affect the mic and the sound that you're producing through that mic. Because you may want to use a mic for miking up an amp or just for your vocals, right? And then once you know the kind of the pattern that you're going to be after for your usage, then you can go out and buy a suitable mic, and then you have about a bazillion choices of different brands of microphones. You know, this is kind of like a cheaper one, pretty heavy duty. It's all metal construction, which is nice. The only thing I don't like about it is it's got an on and off switch, but it is a karaoke mic, and karaoke mics will have an on and off switch. You don't want a karaoke mic for live performance in a band, but you do want it for karaoke setup, okay, which is very handy. Okay, you don't want to use a microphone with an on and off switch in your studio unless you're going to leave that switch on all the time and just mute at the board. Okay, otherwise you get a thump sound through the thing, which, well, I guess you could cut it off that way and delete that out of your DAW later. You know, whatever works for you in that sense, but microphones with switches for on and off tend to be very cheap and not the same vocal range quality capabilities as a microphone that does not have a switch. And no, taking out the switch is not going to solve your problem with sound quality. It's also the mic element, it's the size of the dome, it's the screen underneath, how thick the material is, okay, etc. It's the element itself, how the element works. You know, there's a lot of science in behind microphones. So for me, I choose to use something like a PGA 48 mic on my keyboard. Yes, it does have an on and off switch. It's a very good quality one because it's a great quality microphone too. It is made by Shure after all. But I use that into my keyboard. It just makes more sense because it's designed to work with my keyboard. Where something like an SM57 or 58 with their mic elements will not work properly with plugging direct into my keyboard. Those need to be plugged in right into my soundboard. But if you are going to try using them on like a keyboard that has a plug-in, or you know, some other source that's not normal for the SM series to be plugged into, you would need like a power transformer system to be able to clean things up and push a little bit more extra preamp juice through, right? So that's a lot of extra expense that you can actually avoid by, you know, just not using the SM series mics for that application. Use them for what they're designed for. So, but anyway, if you have any other questions, feel free to ask. I'll do the best I can to answer them, but pretty much where we're at with this, we've covered it. So what you need to do next is just Google microphone patterns, okay? And you'll find a lot of charts available, so click on images once you get to that, you know, thing in Google. Just click images, and they'll show you different layouts of different patterns and what they mean, what they're about, how they work, and then what the application is best for your suitability of the pattern you go after. And then you go shopping at your local music store or online at Amazon, if Amazon will give you that kind of information on the mics you're looking at. And then this way you can make your best selected choice from there, because just because it has the pattern you want doesn't mean it's going to be a quality product either, okay? And yes, you do get what you pay for to a certain point, but sometimes, yes, you can spend a bit less and get a better product as well. It's kind of it's plain Russian roulette when it comes to anything we buy. So anyway, that's what I've got for you guys. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Sorry about the length, but hey, you got to cover some ground. I need to give you the information so you know. In the meantime, yeah, we'll catch you on the next video. So see ya.